For 11 years, she dreamed of her son's return until he stood in the doorway, older, stranger, and carrying something the darkness had given him. What if coming home was only the beginning of the nightmare? The night Noah Whitaker vanished began like any other, a soft, amber dusk settling over Briar Glen, the air thick with the smell of pine and rain-soaked earth in the Whitaker house. The lights were dimmed, and the sounds of bedtime echoed through. The hall's bathwater draining, a toothbrush clinking against porcelain. The low murmur of a lullaby from a music box tucked onto a dresser, ordinary, that was the word Hannah. Whitaker would repeat to herself for years after everything was ordinary. Noah had asked for just one more story, his small hands clutching. Mr. Thumper, the well-worn stuffed rabbit he'd carried since he could walk. Hannah smiled, ruffled his damp hair, and gave in. The book was The Night Sky, one they'd read 100 times, its pages soft at the edges. The spine nearly broken, she read softly, her voice rising and falling like a tide, and by the last page, Noah's eyelids were heavy. He yawned, nestled deeper into the covers, and whispered, "Will you leave the door open a little?" She kissed his forehead, promised she would, and left the room with the door cracked just enough for the hallway light to slip in. Downstairs, Mark was asleep on the couch, TV flickering silent images across his face. Hannah turned it off, pulled the blanket over him, and tidied the kitchen, moving through the house in small, familiar motions. A glass in the sink, lights off, doors locked. She checked the front door, last deadbolt turned, porch light flickering softly. Rain starting to spatter against the windows. It was 11 o'clock. By 11:12, everything had changed. Storm had rolled in fast, wind pressing against the windows. Thunder low and distant. Something pulled at Hannah, a restlessness, a flicker of unease. She climbed the stairs quietly, pausing at Noah's door. The room was too quiet. She pushed it open. Noah's bed was empty, not slept in. The blanket was folded at the foot. Mr. Thumper gone. The window was closed. Locked, the closet door open just a crack, but nothing inside. She whispered his name, first lightly, then again louder, "Noah." Panic hadn't set in yet, just confusion. She checked the bathroom, nothing. The guest room, nothing. Downstairs, the couch was empty. Mark was now awake, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, and Hannah didn't answer at first. She moved to the front door instinctively, like something was pulling her. It was open, not wide, just barely ajar, the lock undone, rain blowing in, puddling on the hardwood floor. She stepped outside barefoot, heart racing, eyes scanning the dark. "Noah?" Her voice cracked. Thunder rolled. There was no answer, no footprints, no signs of struggle, just the open door and the cold, wet silence of the night. Mark called 911 at 11:23. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. "Are you sure he left the house?" Mark's voice broke. "The door was open. He's gone by morning." The town of Briar Glen was awake and searching. Police combed the neighborhood. Neighbors knocked on doors. Volunteers with flashlights and flyers walked the woods. For weeks they searched, then months. Then the years came. And with them, silence. No sightings, no evidence. Noah Whitaker had vanished without a trace. And then, 11 years later, Hannah stood in the same doorway, aged, tired, her hand brushing the same doorknob. A storm raged outside, lightning flashing against the trees. She sipped tea, her routine unbroken. The porch light still flickering at 8 p.m., always. Then came a knock. 3 times, soft, deliberate. She opened the door, and the cup slipped from her hands. It shattered on the floor. A teenage boy stood there, soaked, shivering, eyes wide. Familiar. "Mom?" he whispered. "I think I'm your son." Briar Glen was the kind of town that barely made it onto maps. Tucked into the folds of Vermont's pine-covered hills, it was a place where the roads narrowed and twisted like secrets, where fog clung to the ground like breath that had nowhere else to go. On autumn nights, the leaves glowed ember orange beneath the soft hum of streetlights, and the whole town smelled of wood smoke and rain. People waved at each other from porches. Children rode bikes without fear. The general store still sold penny candy in glass jars, and the post office closed for lunch. For a long time, Briar Glen was untouched by the things that made headlines elsewhere. No big city crime, no scandals, no tragedies too large for casseroles and vigils to mend. The kind of place where you could leave your front door unlocked and sleep soundly. At least that's how it used to be. Everything changed the night Noah Whitaker vanished. A boy of 7, with a gap-toothed smile and a laugh that echoed down the school hallways, simply disappeared from his bed. No signs of a break-in, no footprints in the yard. Just an open door, a folded blanket, and a town that woke up to something it didn't have words for. Briar Glen had always been good at routine: school buses at 7:45, church bells at noon, lights out by 10. But after that night, nothing felt certain. Parents double-checked locks they'd never bothered with before. Porch lights stayed on longer. Children were no longer allowed to play in the woods past dusk. Something unseen had crept into the towns. Bones, and it left everyone a little colder, a little quieter. In the days that followed, neighbors brought food to the Whitakers' door: casseroles, pies, tins of soup. They gathered on porches and at the diner, whispering theories and fears. Some blamed strangers passing through. Others whispered about the woods' old tales about things that didn't belong in the daylight. But none of it helped Hannah. None of it brought Noah back. She became a fixture on Apple Blossom Lane, always there, always waiting. She'd sit on the porch swing long after the street fell silent, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, eyes fixed on the curve of the road where he might one day return. She left his room untouched, the sheets washed every Sunday, the toys dusted, the window cracked open just enough to let in the breeze. And the porch light, she never let it go dark. In Briar Glen, time didn't stop, but it lost its rhythm. Years passed, measured not in birthdays or holidays, but in anniversaries of the night Noah disappeared. "It's been 3 years," people would murmur at the grocery store. 5, 10. As if by marking the time, they could somehow undo it. But the truth was, they had grown used to the ache. It lived in the pauses of conversation, in the way people looked away when they passed the Whitaker house. Grief had become part of the landscape, and yet, even as the world moved on, new families moved in, paint faded, trees grew taller, one thing remained unchanged. Every night, as the sky turned purple and the mist curled low over the hills, the porch light on Apple Blossom Lane flickered on at exactly 8 p.m., not bright, not showy. Just a soft, unwavering glow. A beacon, a promise. A mother's way of saying, "I'm still here. Come home." There are nights that leave only a blur, moments fading into each other like colors on a canvas left out in the rain. And then there are nights like this one, etched into memory with painful precision. For Hannah Whitaker, the night her son vanished lived inside her like a film reel, looping endlessly. Every detail, every breath remained fixed in place, refusing to soften with time. It had been a Tuesday. The kind of quiet evening where nothing hinted at the unraveling to come. Dinner was simple: grilled cheese, tomato soup, the crusts cut off just the way Noah liked. He had spent the afternoon building a tower of blocks in the living room, narrating the construction process to Mr. Thumper, his stuffed rabbit with one bent ear and a loose button eye. They watched cartoons after dinner, laughter echoing off the walls, and for just a moment, everything felt safe. Ordinary. Whole. Bath time came with its usual protests. Noah splashing water, insisting he didn't need soap, that he was clean enough to be a pirate. Hannah wrapped him in a towel, still warm and wiggly, and carried him upstairs. He chose his pajamas, the rocket ship ones, and climbed into bed, Mr. Thumper tucked under one arm. He asked for The Night Sky, his favorite book. They had read it countless times, but still he listened intently, eyes wide as she spoke of constellations and moonbeams, the faraway wonders of the universe. When she closed the book, he yawned. the kind that made his whole face scrunch up. "Can you leave the door open a crack?" he asked, voice small, "so Mr. Thumper can hear the hallway sounds." Hannah smiled, leaned in, kissed his forehead. "Of course," she said. "I love you." "I love you more," Noah replied, his eyes fluttering shut. That was the last time she heard his voice. Downstairs, the night was uneventful. Mark had gone to bed early, tired from a long shift at the mill. Hannah stayed up, folding laundry, flipping through a book she didn't remember the next day. Around 11 p.m., she walked the house like she always did, habit, not worry, checking locks, turning off lights. She paused at the back door, glanced at the small security monitor on the counter. It showed the garage, the driveway, the front path, all quiet. She didn't know then that those images would become evidence, would be scrutinized frame by frame in the days ahead. She went to bed around 11:20. At 6:45 the next morning, she woke to the alarm, expecting to find Noah under the covers, still clutching Mr. Thumper. But his bed was perfectly made, untouched. The blanket folded at the foot just like she had left it. His rabbit gone. She called out to him, checked the bathroom, the hallway. Nothing. Panic began to pulse through her chest. A dull roar growing louder, and then she saw it. The front door, not wide open, just barely ajar. A sliver of morning light spilling. Her hands shook as she ran to it, stepping out onto the porch, eyes searching the yard, the street, anywhere. No sign of him, no footprints in the dew-covered grass. Just silence. The security footage was pulled within hours. Detective Jensen, young and methodical, reviewed every second. At 11:09 p.m., the camera blinked. A flicker, then static. The feed returned at 11:15. 6 minutes missing. 6 minutes that would haunt Hannah every single day. She replayed it constantly. In her mind, what could happen in 6 minutes? A life could be rewritten. A boy could vanish. A mother could lose the sound of her child's laughter, the weight of his small hand in hers, and no matter how many times she rewound the memory, she could never find the moment where it all went wrong. The search began before dawn, while the sky was still heavy with the gray hush of early morning. Police cars lined the street, their lights flashing against the neat houses of Apple Blossom Drive. Neighbors stood on porches in robes and slippers, whispering behind hands, eyes dart into the Whitaker house with cautious sympathy. Word traveled fast in Briar Glen. A child missing, a door left open, a bed untouched. It didn't take long before everyone knew. Volunteers came in waves. Friends, teachers, strangers. They combed the woods with flashlights, formed lines across fields, waded into creeks with rope and poles. They called his name over and over until it felt less like a word and more like a wound. Noah, echoing through the hills, swallowed by trees. They drained ponds, checked abandoned sheds, tore through underbrush and brambles, hoping to find anything, a clue, a scrap of clothing, a footprint. But the ground gave them nothing. Dogs were brought in, noses trained for the faintest trace of a missing child. They sniffed his pillow, his clothes, even Mr. Thumper's threadbare ear. But they lost the trail at the front porch, circling aimlessly. At the edge of the lawn, no footprints in the dew. No scent beyond the boundary of home. It was as if Noah had stepped out the door and simply ceased to exist. FBI agents arrived by the second day, their suits crisp, their questions clinical. They taped off the house, took photographs, dusted for prints. They asked Hannah and Mark to recount the timeline again and again. Their words dissected, compared, analyzed for inconsistencies. But there were none. Only the truth, the unbearable simplicity of it. He had gone to bed, and then he was gone. Mark threw himself into them. Search like a man trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. He built maps, sketched timelines on the kitchen walls, pinned photos and notes with red string connecting every possible theory. He barely slept, barely ate. He interrogated neighbors, demanded access to their home security footage, drove for hours each day retracing roads and trails. His obsession grew wild, tangled. He was chasing a shadow with no shape, no end. Hannah watched him fall apart. She tried to hold them together, tried to stay anchored, for Noah's sake, for her own. But grief has its own gravity, and Mark had become lost in it. Their conversations turned to arguments, their arguments to silence. By the end of the first year, Mark had moved into the guest room. By the second, he was gone. Briar Glen moved on, as towns do. The posters faded, the search parties dwindled. New families moved in, new children laughed on playgrounds. People stopped whispering. They looked away when they passed Hannah in the grocery store. Their sympathy turned to discomfort. It was easier to believe that Noah was gone forever than to carry the weight of what if, but Hannah didn't move on. She couldn't. She left his room untouched, kept his toothbrush in its holder, his favorite cereal in the pantry. She kept the porch light on every night at 8 p.m. and every morning. Before the world woke, she stood on the porch and watched the road, waiting for a figure she still believed might come home. The first letter arrived in late autumn, 3 years after Noah vanished. It came on a Thursday, sandwiched between a utility bill and a flyer for discounted chimney sweeps. Hannah almost didn't notice it, a plain white envelope, no return. Address, the postmark smudged but legible, Spokane, Washington. She didn't know anyone in Washington. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a cold, mechanical font. No greeting, no signature. Just 7 words, he is not lost. He is waiting. At first, she thought. It was a cruel prank, someone toying with her grief, with the hole in her life where Noah used to be. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment she just stared at the words, unable to move. Then she read them again. And again. Each time the meaning shifted, sharpened, not lost. Waiting, for what? She took the letter to Detective Jensen, who had remained in touch over the years, always careful not to offer false hope. He examined it, gloves on, his expression tight, no fingerprints, no DNA, no discernible errors in the text, no watermark on the paper. Whoever had sent it knew exactly what they were doing, precise, methodical, detached. They ran it through every database they had, but it matched nothing. No ransom note, no prior case. Just a message dropped into Hannah's life like a pebble. Into deep water, rippling through everything. Mark never found out. He had stopped asking questions by then, buried himself in work, convinced himself that moving on was the only way to survive. He didn't see the way Hannah flinched at the sound of the mail slot each morning. Didn't notice the small, locked wooden box she kept under their bed, the one with a new key she wore on a chain around her neck, because it wasn't just one letter. The second arrived 4 months later, postmarked from Topeka, Kansas. Same envelope, same font, same message. He is not lost. He is waiting. The third came from Portland, Maine, then Santa Fe, New Mexico, then Peoria, Illinois. No pattern, no trail. Just those 7 words. By the 5th letter, Hannah had stopped reporting them. The police had no leads, no answers. Each letter left her shaken, but also strangely alive, as if somewhere in the dark, Noah's name was still being spoken. Still. Reaching her, she began to wonder, who was sending them? And more disturbingly, how did they know? Sometimes she would take the letters out late at night, sitting on the floor of Noah's room, the air thick with dust and old memories. She'd run her fingers over the paper, the cold type, searching for anything, some hidden clue in the spacing or alignment. But there was nothing, just those 7 words. She began to dream of them. A whisper in the dark. A voice she couldn't place. He is not lost. He is waiting. Waiting for what? For her? For rescue? For the right moment to return? Hannah didn't know. But she kept the porch light on. And every night she checked the mail, heart pounding, eyes scanning for the next message. Because part of her, the part that refused to let go, believed they meant something. That they weren't just reminders of what she had lost, but a signal, a trail. However faint. The rain had started around dusk, slow and steady at first, then heavier, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and silver. Hannah stood by the kitchen window, watching the rivulets race down the glass. The wind stirred the trees, made. The porch swing creaked softly, a sound she knew too well. She was alone. Mark had moved out years ago, and the kids down the street no longer rang the bell asking if Noah could come outside to play. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock above the stove and the occasional groan of the old wood floors settling. She moved through the familiar rooms, cup of chamomile tea in hand, her routine unchanged. Lights dimmed, front door checked. The porch light flickered on at 8 p.m. like it always did. That flicker had once been hope. Over the years, it had become ritual, a habit wrapped in grief. It was just past 10 when the power briefly blinked out, then surged back, the lights shuddering before holding steady again. Hannah barely noticed. The storm rattled the windows, thunder rolling low in the distance. She sat at the kitchen table, nursing her tea, flipping absently through a book she wasn't reading. Her thoughts, as always, drifted to Noah. She tried not to count how many years, how many nights like this she had waited, wondering if somewhere he was hearing the same rain, feeling the same cold. And then came the knock. 3 soft raps. Not hurried, not frantic, deliberate. Hannah froze. Her heart seemed to pause mid-beat, suspended in that moment between sound and understanding. No one knocked this late, not anymore. She stood slowly, her mug forgotten in her hand, and walked to the door. The hallway stretched long and quiet, the dim porch light casting a soft glow through the frosted glass panel. Another knock. 3 again. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob. She didn't speak, didn't ask who it was. Some part of her didn't dare break the spell. The door creaked open. There, in the halo of porch light and rain, stood a boy. Soaked to the skin, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide and dark, like something lost and found all at once. He said nothing at first, just looked at her, his face pale and drawn. There was something familiar in the slope of his jaw, the curve of his brow. A flicker of recognition that hit her like lightning. Then he spoke. "Mom?" His voice was rough, unused. "I think I'm your son." The mug slipped from her hand. It shattered against the tile floor, the sound sharp and final. She didn't move, couldn't breathe. Her mind screamed it wasn't possible. And yet, those eyes, that voice, the way he said "Mom," tentative, unsure, like he was testing the word for the first time in years. Noah? The name barely escaped her lips. He nodded, rain dripping from his lashes. "I don't know what's real," he whispered, "but I think I'm him." Her knees gave out before her voice. The world spun, blurred by tears and disbelief. 11 years gone. And yet, somehow he was standing right there. She sat across from him on the couch, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, heart racing in her chest. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the house was wrapped in the kind of silence that presses against your ears. He was watching her, carefully, uncertain, like he expected her to vanish if he blinked too long. She couldn't stop staring at his face. It was Noah, but not the Noah she had kissed goodnight all those years ago. This was a teenager, taller, leaner, his voice deeper, eyes darker, and yet there were pieces of him that hadn't changed. The slight dimple in his left cheek when he bit his lip. The birthmark near his temple, small, crescent-shaped something. She used to kiss every night before bed. The way he fidgeted, tugging at the cuff of his sleeve just like Noah always had when he was nervous. Still, her mind reeled. Her eyes kept trying to make sense of what they were seeing. 11 years. 11 years had been stolen, and yet here he was, sitting in the same room where he used to play with blocks and build forts out of couch cushions. He was alive, but was he whole? "What do you remember?" she asked, her voice barely above. A whisper. He looked down at his hands, the shadows under his eyes deepening. "I remember your face," he said slowly. Not clearly, like a picture that got wet and smudged. "But I knew I had to find this house." He glanced up, searching. Her face. "I walked for hours. I didn't know where I started, but I knew this street. Apple Blossom Drive." The sound of it on his lips was like a spell breaking. He remembered. "At least that much. I knew my room was upstairs on the left. I remember the way it smelled soap. And something warm. Cinnamon, maybe?" His eyes flickered around the room, unsure. "But where I've been, I don't know. It's like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like I've been asleep." "Asleep? Yeah, but I never woke up. Not until last night. I was just walking, and suddenly I knew. I had to come home." Hannah's breath caught. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but it had never looked like this. He was here, but part of him was still far away. Like he had been torn from some other world and stitched back together imperfectly. "You don't remember where you've been?" she asked. "No." He shook his head. "There's this emptiness. Like I was somewhere, but it's foggy. Faces I can't see. Voices I can't place. Sometimes I hear someone say my name, but it sounds wrong." He looked up again, eyes wide, pleading. "Do you believe me?" Her heart shattered all over again. "You're my son," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but his grip was tentative, unsure. "I want to believe," he said softly, voice breaking. "But sometimes I don't even know if I'm real." And in that moment, Hannah realized the truth. Noah hadn't just been lost. He had been erased, piece by piece, and now he was trying to put himself back together, with only fragments to guide him. The test results came back in 3 days, though it felt like forever. Hannah sat in the police station lobby, fingers clenched around the strap of her purse, trying to steady her breathing. The room was cold, the air too still. Across from her, Noah, if it really was Noah, sat stiffly, knees bouncing, eyes darting to the corners of the room like he was expecting someone to appear. He hadn't spoken much since the night he arrived, and when he did, it was in fragments, half memories, unfinished sentences, moments that seemed to drift away before he could catch them. Detective Jensen emerged from the hallway, his face unreadable. He held the envelope tightly in one hand. Hannah stood, her voice caught in her throat. He gave her a small nod. "It's him," Jensen said softly. "The DNA is a match. This boy is Noah Whitaker." For a moment, everything stopped. The air seemed to fall away. Hannah's legs gave out beneath her, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Relief flooded through her, sharp, dizzying, overwhelming. Her son was alive, but in the hours that followed, the world around them shifted into chaos. News of Noah's return spread like wildfire. By evening, reporters were at her doorstep, camera flashes lighting up the porch like strobe lights. Microphones thrust forward, asking the same question over and over. "Where has he been?" Hannah had no answer. Neither did Noah. They called it a miracle. Headlines splashed across every screen. "Boy missing 11 years found alive, Noah Whitaker returns." The lost son comes home. People wanted a happy ending. They wanted the story to make sense, to be wrapped in a bow, to restore something that had been broken. But underneath the celebration was unease. Noah had scars. Small ones, pale and thin, like lines drawn across his skin in places no child should. Have been hurt. One above his left shoulder blade, another on his ankle, and one just below the base of his neck. He said he didn't know how they got there. He didn't remember pain. But when Hannah saw them, she had to leave the room. He also knew things he shouldn't. During a conversation with Detective Jensen, he mentioned a fire that had occurred in town 6 years earlier, at an abandoned warehouse near the edge of Briar Glen, details no one had discussed with him. "I saw it," Noah said quietly, staring out the window. "From the hill. There was a blue car nearby." His voice sounded far away, like he was reciting a story he'd only half lived. Jensen confirmed the detail. A blue car had been found near the scene, its driver never identified. Then there were the drawings. Noah sketched constantly, pages filled with machines, symbols, strange patterns that didn't belong to any child's imagination. He called them memories. He didn't know where they came from, only that when he closed his eyes, his hand moved on its own, and always. There was that look in his eyes. Not vacant, but weighted. Like he was watching something only he could see. Hannah tried to reach him, to hold him close, but there was a part of him that didn't bend, didn't soften. A part of him that had been somewhere far beyond her reach. Was her son. DNA didn't lie, but someone had stolen more than years. They had stolen pieces of him, and no one yet knew how deep that theft ran. The door creaked open slowly, the sound stretching through the quiet hallway like a breath held too long. Hannah stood beside him, hand on the knob, not sure if she should lead him in or let him go on his own. For 11 years the room hadn't changed. Dust had gathered and been swept away, sheets washed every Sunday, but nothing had been moved, nothing taken down. She had preserved it the way some people preserve memories, desperately, with hope like a splinter lodged too deep to remove. Noah stood in the doorway, still as stone, eyes locked on the bed, the window, the shelves filled with toys now faded by sunlight and time. His face didn't show recognition exactly. More like confusion, like he was seeing something familiar through glass. His eyes scanned the room slowly, taking it all in: the blue walls, the poster of a rocket ship above the dresser, the growth chart marked with his height in pencil, the last line drawn the week before he vanished. 3 feet, 9 inches, age 7, Noah's. Getting tall. "I dreamed about this room," he said softly, almost to himself. Only it was in black and white. Hannah turned to look at him, heart caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" He took a cautious step inside, as though afraid the floor might give way beneath him. His fingers brushed over the edge of the dresser, trailing dust. In the dream, everything was the same, but wrong. Like, I knew it was mine, but the colors were gone. I could see the toys, the books, but they didn't feel real. Like I was remembering a photograph I'd never taken. He crouched beside the bed, running his hand along the floorboards. His movements were slow, careful. Then he reached underneath, and after a moment, his hand emerged holding something small and worn. Mr. Thumper, the stuffed rabbit, was as he'd left it, fur matted, one ear drooping, the left eye a shiny black button barely hanging on. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. She hadn't seen the toy in years. It had disappeared the same night he had, and she had assumed it was gone forever. Noah stared at it, expression unreadable. I don't remember this." "That's Mr. Thumper," Hannah said gently. "You never went to bed without him." He frowned, turning the rabbit over in his hands. "I remember a rabbit, but not the name. Did I call him that?" "You named him when you were 2, she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You couldn't say Thumper right at first. You used to say Tumper." She smiled faintly, the memory like a shard of glass in her chest. Noah didn't smile. He held the rabbit close to his chest but still looked uncertain. "It's strange. I remember how it feels to hold him. But I don't remember ever giving him a name." He sat down on the bed, staring at the growth chart on the wall. "It's like someone pressed delete," he said, "but didn't finish the job." Hannah sat beside him, her hand reaching out but stopping just short of his. "You're home now," she whispered. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the wall. Just wish it felt like it. The first drawing appeared 2 days after Noah's return. Hannah found it on the kitchen table in the early morning light. The edges of the paper still curled from where he had pressed too hard with the pencil. At first glance, it looked like a tangle of lines, a child's idle scribble. But when she picked it up, something about the precision of it made her breath catch. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Arcs, circles, repeating shapes like the inner workings of a clock, or a machine she didn't recognize. Along the bottom of the page, in a tight row, were tiny symbols she didn't understand. Not letters, not numbers. Something else. The lines were sharp, methodical, drawn with a focus that didn't belong to a teenager who hadn't held a pencil in over a decade. When Noah came downstairs, she showed it to him. "What is this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked at it, eyes dark and distant. "I think I saw it," he said simply. "Where?" He shook his head. "I don't know. Somewhere. It was in a dream." Or maybe it wasn't. That was how it started. Every night after that, he drew. Sheets of paper piled up diagrams, blueprints, strange patterns that seemed impossibly complex for someone his age. Some looked like buildings, others like machines. One was a spiral, filled with those same unreadable symbols, growing tighter and tighter toward the center. He never explained them, just said they came to him. At first, Hannah tried to ignore the chill creeping up her spine. Her son was home, alive. That should have been enough. But as the days passed, she began to notice other things, small things at first, easy to dismiss. The way he spoke sometimes, using phrases she didn't recognize. "It's time for the cycle to complete," he had murmured once, staring out the window at nothing. "What cycle?" she had asked. He didn't answer. He didn't even seem to hear her. Other times, he'd stop mid-sentence and fall silent, as if something inside him had shut off. Once, while folding laundry, she caught him staring at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly like he was testing them, trying to remember how they worked. Then there were the dreams. He wouldn't talk about them, but she heard him at night murmuring. In his sleep, sometimes crying out. She stood outside his door, frozen, listening to the fragments of words. "They're watching." "Not ready," "reset." Words that didn't make sense, spoken in a tone that made her skin crawl. She tried to tell herself it was trauma, that 11 years away had left its mark. But in the quiet hours, she admitted the truth. She didn't recognize the boy in her. Home. He looked like Noah. He had Noah's eyes, Noah's smile, but something else was there too. Something colder, distant. As if someone had rearranged him from the inside out and left just enough of her son behind to keep her hoping. Night, she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by his drawings. The lines seemed to shift under the dim light, almost pulsing. She picked up one, her fingers trembling. "What happened to you?" she whispered. Noah stood in the doorway. "I wish I knew," he said quietly. And for the first time, she realized he was just as afraid as she was. Detective Thomas Jensen hadn't worn a badge in 5 years, but the weight of the Noah Whitaker case had never left his shoulders. Retirement was supposed to bring peacetime spent fishing, fixing up the old cabin, sleeping without the hum of unsolved cases in his mind. But the Whitaker case had lingered like a thread he could never pull free. Some nights he still dreamt of Hannah's face the morning they found the open door, the child's empty bed, the fading trail of footprints that led nowhere. He never stopped thinking about what he might have missed. When news broke that Noah had returned, Jensen sat at his kitchen table for an hour, the newspaper trembling in his hands. The boy was alive. It should have felt like victory, like closure. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something darker. He needed to see for himself. He arrived at the Whitaker house on a cloudy afternoon, the sky low and heavy with unspent rain. Hannah greeted him at the door, older now, her eyes shadowed by years of waiting. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. She simply stepped aside and let him in. Noah sat in the living room, legs drawn up on the couch, sketching in a notebook. He looked up when Jensen entered. Their eyes met a long, steady look. Not fear, not even curiosity. Just assessment. Like Noah was trying to place him in some vast, fractured puzzle. "You were one of the men looking for me," Noah said. Jensen nodded. "I was." They sat across from each other at the dining table, the old case files spread between them. Yellowed. Photographs, reports, maps, the flurry of documentation from those first frantic weeks. Jensen watched Noah's eyes as he flipped through the pages, searching for a flicker of recognition. Then Noah paused. His finger rested on an image, an old missing person flyer. The one that had hung in the post office, the library, and on every telephone pole in Briar Glen for months. A photo of his 7-year-old self, smiling. The word "missing" in bold letters above. "I saw this," Noah said quietly. Hannah leaned in. "Where?" Noah's brow furrowed. It was behind glass. Like a display. There were other pictures too, of people. "Not just me." Jensen's pulse quickened. "Where was this?" "Do you remember?" Noah shook his head slowly. The room was white. Very cold. There was a voice, a man's voice. He said, "These are the forgotten ones." I don't know what that means. Jensen exchanged a glance with Hannah. Could it have been a hospital? A clinic? Noah looked down at the flyer again. It didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like a museum, but not for the public. Like it was meant for someone else, someone watching. He tapped the glass over the image in the photo. There was a camera above it. I remember the red light blinking. Jensen sat back, the unease in his chest deepening. The boy's memories weren't complete, but they weren't empty either. Someone had shown him his own missing poster. Displayed. It preserved it. For what purpose? No one had an answer. But one thing was clear: Noah hadn't just been lost. He had been kept. The field lay at the edge of Briar Glen, a wide expanse of tall, brittle grass, bordered by a crooked fence and a thicket of trees that had grown wild in the years since. Mark Whitaker hadn't been back there since the fire, since the smoke curled into the sky that summer, and the scent of burning earth hung in the air for days. Locals said it was lightning, an accident. But Mark had never believed in accidents, not since Noah disappeared. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove, eyes flicking toward the boy in the passenger seat. Noah stared out the window, his face unreadable, fingers clutching Mr. Thumper loosely in his lap. He still held the rabbit like it meant something, even if he didn't remember why. "I thought it might help," Mark said, breaking the silence. "Coming here, this place. Something about it always felt wrong." Noah didn't respond. He just kept watching the trees pass, their branches twisting against the overcast sky. When they reached the edge of the field, Mark killed the engine. The car ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound in the stillness. They got out. The ground was uneven, charred in places where the fire had burned deepest. Nature had begun to reclaim it: tufts of grass pushing through the blackened soil, weeds curling around the fence posts, but the scars remained. The air here was different, heavy, expectant. Noah walked ahead, slow and deliberate, his shoes crunching against the gravel path. Mark followed a few steps behind, his breath tight in his chest. He watched the way Noah moved, how his shoulders stiffened the closer he got to the center of the field, and then Noah stopped. "This is it," he said softly. Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" Noah turned slightly, eyes scanning the empty space. "This is where I left." Mark stepped beside him, heart pounding. "Left where, Noah?" The boy didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on a patch of ground that looked no different than the rest, just scorched earth and broken grass. But his expression changed, his eyes going distant, like he was seeing something Mark couldn't. "There was a light," Noah whispered. "Not like a flashlight. It came from the ground. There was humming and a voice. A woman, I think. She said, "He's ready." Then everything went dark. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "Noah, are you sure?" Noah nodded slowly. "I remember the smell, like something burning. Not wood, something else. Sharp, it hurt my nose." Mark looked around, searching for something to make sense of the boy's words. But there was nothing. No markings, no ruins, no clues. Just a field that had burned and then been forgotten. "Noah," Mark said gently, "do you remember who took you?" The boy's lips parted, but no sound came. He took a shaky breath and shook his head. "I don't know. I feel like I was here. And then I wasn't." Mark wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he didn't. Instead, he put a hand on his son's shoulder, the touch tentative. Noah didn't pull away. They stood together in the silence of the field, surrounded by ghosts and ash, trying to understand what had been lost and what had been done. The email arrived late at night, long after Hannah had stopped expecting the world to offer anything but silence. She almost deleted it, assuming it was more noise from the media or someone hungry for a story they didn't live. But the subject line caught her breath. Dylan Granger. "Please read." She opened it with trembling hands. The message was brief, careful, typed like someone afraid their words might be watched. "My name is Claire Granger. My son, Dylan, disappeared in 2012. He was 7. I believe our sons are connected. Please, I need to speak with you." Hannah stared at the screen, blood roaring in her ears. Dylan Granger. The name tugged at something buried deep in her memory. She pulled up the old binder, the one filled with clippings and printouts from the early days of Noah's disappearance. She had cataloged every missing child report within 6 months of Noah's case, just in case. There it was, Dylan Granger, 7 years old. Vanished from his backyard in Milltown, Pennsylvania. July 15, 2012. Noah had disappeared 2 days later. They had never been connected. Different states, different circumstances. Dylan had been playing outside when his mother went inside for 5 minutes. When she returned, he was gone. No witnesses, no evidence. Just like Noah, Hannah called her at once. Claire's voice was brittle, like glass stretched thin. "I don't know where to start," she said. "I saw the news about Noah. I can't even explain what that did to me. I thought maybe Dylan might." Her words caught. Hannah waited. Claire continued, softer now. "But then, I remembered something. 3 years after Dylan vanished, I got a letter. No return address typed. It said, 'He is not lost. He is waiting.'" Hannah's breath caught. "You got the letters too?" Claire exhaled sharply. "There were 5 over 2 years. Each from a different city. I told the police. They found nothing." A long silence stretched between them, and then, Claire said, voice shaking, "2 weeks ago, I heard a knock. Late, just like you described. I ran to the door and opened it, thinking, hoping. But no one was there. Just something on the porch. What was it?" Hannah asked, already knowing. "A stuffed rabbit," Claire whispered, soaked through from the rain. "It wasn't Dylan's. I'd never seen it before. But I kept it." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Thumper. Dylan hadn't had one. But someone had left it anyway, a message. Or a warning. "Do you think he's still alive?" Claire asked. Hannah didn't know how to answer. Her son had returned, but not whole, not unscarred. Whatever had taken Noah had left something behind in his place. A shadow, a question mark in the shape of her child. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think someone wants us to find out." And somewhere, wherever Dylan Granger had gone, a door had been left ajar. Noah didn't sleep much. Hannah would often find him awake in the early hours, sitting upright in bed, staring at the wall like he was waiting for something or someone. When she asked if he was okay, he'd just nod and lie, soft and automatic. I'm fine, just thinking. But there was something in his eyes that never quite matched his words. It was late one evening, rain tapping softly against the windows again, when he told her, "There's a man," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I see him." Hannah's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "In mirrors, windows, not directly. Only when I'm not looking for him." He paused, his fingers tightening around the edge of his blanket. "He doesn't move like other people. He's still. But his eyes, they're loud." Hannah swallowed, her throat dry. "Noah, is this someone you remember from before?" Noah looked down. "I don't know if he's real. Maybe he's part of the dream, but I call him the Whisperer." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. "Why that name?" Noah hesitated, then said quietly, "He used to sit beside me at night. He told me stories, not the good kind. Stories that made me forget things. He told me forgetting was better." "Where did this happen?" she asked, voice cracking. "In the White Room," Noah said, "with the lights that never turned off." "I don't know how long I was there." Hannah felt her knees weaken. She sat down beside him, forcing herself to stay calm. "What did the Whisperer look like?" Noah's brow furrowed. "I don't know. His face changes, but his voice doesn't. It's always close, even when he's far away." That night, Hannah did something she never thought she'd do. She set up cameras in Noah's room. Small ones, discreet, mounted at the corners near the ceiling. She didn't tell him she couldn't bear to make him feel watched again. But she had to know if someone was still reaching into their home. The first night, nothing happened. The footage showed Noah tossing and turning, but nothing out of the ordinary. The second night, the same. The third night, however, something changed. At 3:06 a.m., the footage glitched. It wasn't long, just a flicker. A single frame distorted by static. But when Hannah paused it, her breath caught in her throat. There was someone in the room, not close, not clear, but there, standing near the mirror across from Noah's bed. The figure was tall, too tall, with arms hanging straight at its sides. And a face Hannah couldn't make out. No details, just the vague shape of a man. The reflection of Noah still in bed, eyes closed. The camera resumed a moment later. The figure gone. Hannah sat frozen at the monitor, heart racing, sweat on her palms. She didn't know what she had seen. A glitch, a shadow, a trick of light, or the Whisperer. All she knew was this: Noah wasn't imagining. It's someone or something had been there, watching, waiting, and it wasn't finished. The building sat at the end of a forgotten road, swallowed by overgrowth and time. It didn't look like much, just a squat, windowless structure of concrete and metal, hidden behind what used to be a chain-link fence, now twisted and rusted. In places, the sign out front had long since faded, but faint outlines remained. Briar Glen Wellness Center. Closed in 2012 after funding was cut and operations ceased. At least, that was the official story. Hannah had driven past it countless times over the years, never giving it a second thought. But now, with Noah in the passenger seat, staring at the building with a quiet intensity, everything felt different. "This place," Noah whispered. "I know it. You've been here before?" Hannah asked, heart racing. Noah didn't answer right away. He just opened the car door and stepped out, his feet crunching on the gravel. Hannah followed him through the waist-high grass, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. The front doors of the facility were covered in graffiti, the glass shattered, vines curling through the frame. Inside, darkness greeted them like a breath. They stepped into the lobby, their footsteps echoing on the cracked tile floor. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The air was cool and still, like the building was holding its breath. Noah moved with a strange sense of purpose, pausing occasionally, head tilted, like he was listening for something. Hannah kept close, flashlight sweeping across abandoned chairs, broken equipment, and peeling paint. Files and papers littered the ground. but most of the cabinets had been emptied long ago. Then Noah stopped in front of a door at the end of a narrow hallway. Unlike the others, this one was intact, heavy, metal. A keypad sat beside the handle, dead from years without power. "This one," he said quietly. "There's something behind it." Hannah tried the handle, but it didn't budge. They stood there for a long moment, and then she noticed its scratches near the lock, faint but deliberate. Someone had tried to force it open before. She found a crowbar near a broken cabinet and handed it to Noah. It took effort, the screech of metal on metal loud in the silence, but eventually the door groaned open. Beyond it was a small room, dust thick in the air, but something about it felt different. Untouched, preserved. A row of filing cabinets stood along one wall, and beside them, a metal table stacked with folders, photos, and old monitors long since dead. Hannah moved slowly, her fingers trembling as she picked up the first file. On the front, stamped in red, "Project Adrift." Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside were records, names, dates, notes in cold, clinical language. She flipped through them, and then she saw it. Subject number 7, Noah Whitaker. Cognitive response stabilized. Reintegration pending. Her knees nearly gave out. Noah stood beside her, staring at the file with wide eyes. "I was a project," he said, voice hollow. Hannah's breath hitched. "No, you're my son, but in that room, surrounded by the truth they had never been meant to find, neither of them knew what that meant anymore." The documents were brittle with age, some stained with water, others carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, as if they had once mattered greatly to someone, or to something. Hannah sat at the metal table in the small, dust-choked room, page after page spread before her, like broken pieces of a life she no longer recognized. Noah sat beside her, silent, pale, his eyes scanning the files with a detachment that frightened her. There was no question anymore. These weren't just abandoned records. They were a confession. At the top of one heavily stamped folder was a name, the Alder Group. Not a hospital, not a school, but a private organization, registered under multiple shell corporations. It's listed. Purpose: vague behavioral research, developmental studies, cognitive resilience testing. Buried beneath the jargon was something clearer, something colder. Unauthorized human subject trials. Hannah's hands trembled as she read the summaries. The language was sterile, emotionless, the tone of people who didn't see children. They saw subjects, variables, data points. The documents detailed a program called Project Adrift, designed to study controlled memory disruption in developing minds. Specifically, how children could be detached from identity, family, and emotion and then reintegrated under guided narratives. They called it cognitive obedience conditioning. Hannah called it evil. Noah's file was the thickest. Subject number 7. His intake report dated July 2012. Notes followed. Months and years of them, charting his behavior, his responses, his compliance level. There were mentions of methods used: sensory deprivation, scripted reinforcement, dream manipulation. One line stood out in Hannah's mind like a scream. Initial resistance high. Subject exhibits strong emotional tethering. Recommend increased exposure to whisperer. Her blood ran cold. She flipped another page. And there it was again, the whisperer. A designation, not a person. Listed as audio guide unit, used in nightly sessions to implant and reinforce false memories. There were recordings referenced, logs of when they had been played. Noah had not dreamed the man in the mirror. He had lived with him. Beside her, Noah whispered, "I wasn't supposed to remember." Hannah looked at him, tears in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "They told me my name was something else. That I didn't have a family. That I was chosen because I could forget." He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. "But I didn't forget. Not all the way. More pages, more truths." The Alder Group had been shut down in 2013, at least officially. Investigations were quietly buried. Files disappeared. But the facility remained. And Noah, along with at least 10 other children, had vanished into its walls. The final note in his file chilled her to the bone. Reintegration failed. Subject reawakened. Observation no longer viable. Release recommended. They let me go, Noah said. Not because I was ready. Because I broke it. I broke whatever they did to me. And in that moment, Hannah realized the impossible truth. Her son had not just survived. He had fought his way back through layers of lies, through a stolen identity, through a life engineered to erase him. He had resisted, and he had come home. The headlines were everywhere. Secret experiments on missing children uncovered. Alder Group scandal shocks nation. Noah Whitaker, the boy who came back. Reporters swarmed Briar Glen like a tidal wave, setting up outside the Whitaker home with cameras, microphones, and a relentless hunger for a story that would not let them rest. News vans lined the street. Strangers knocked at the door. Drones hovered over the yard. For most of the world, Noah had become a symbol of survival, of mystery, of horror undone. They called him the miracle boy, the child who returned. From nowhere, the boy whose reappearance had cracked open a conspiracy no one wanted to believe. But for Noah, it wasn't a miracle. It wasn't even healing. It was just noise. Deafening, unwanted noise. He watched the news coverage from the corner of the living room. The sound turned low but still sharp enough to cut. His face, his name, his story, they weren't his anymore. They belonged to everyone else. People who never knew him but claimed him anyway. The government moved fast. Once the Alder Group's name surfaced again, a federal task force descended. Raids were carried out in 3 states. Files were seized. Men in suits delivered statements with grave faces and polished words. Arrests followed. Doctors, technicians, administrators, people who had once lived in shadows now dragged into light. Lawsuits mounted. Families who had buried empty graves came forward. And at the center of it all was Noah. They wanted him to testify, to speak on camera, to tell the world what had been done. He refused. "I don't want to be a miracle," he told Hannah one morning, his voice flat, eyes on the floor. "I just want to be a boy again." Hannah knelt beside him, gently brushing his hair back like she used to when he was small. "You are a boy," she said softly. "No," he whispered. "I'm what's left of one." He didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears had stopped long ago, somewhere in the white rooms, in the nights when voices told him to forget who he was. Now he just sat, trying to exist in a world that expected him to carry the weight of its outrage and awe. Neighbors left gifts on the porch. Cards, flowers, teddy bears. Noah didn't open them. He didn't want their pity, their fascination. He wanted normal, though he didn't remember exactly what that felt like. The hardest part was the quiet moments. When the cameras were gone, when the house was still, and the only sound was the wind against the windows. That's when the ghosts returned, not of people, but of places, feelings, echoes of years stolen. Hannah tried to shield him from the storm. She canceled interviews, declined offers for book deals and documentaries. She turned off the phone, unplugged the TV. She sat with him on the back porch, watching the sky turn pink with dusk, and listened to him breathe. "I'm tired of being looked at," he said once. "I know," she replied, "but I see you, Noah, not the miracle, just you." He didn't answer, but for the first time in days he smiled. Just a flicker dot, it was a start. The room smelled of new paint and lemon wood polish, but beneath it lingered something older memories that didn't quite fit, like a song half remembered or a dream that slips away before morning. Noah stood in the doorway, the solace of his feet pressed against the cool floorboards, staring at what had once been his world. The walls were no longer blue. Hannah had repainted them a soft gray, hoping to offer him a clean slate. The rocket ship poster was gone, the shelves rearranged, the bed a little bigger now. But in one corner, on the highest shelf, Mr. Thumper sat like a sentinel, still frayed, still one ear drooping, his button eye dangling by a thread. Somehow, of all the things time had tried to take, Mr. Thumper had survived. Noah walked slowly into the room, running his fingers along the edge of the desk. It was new, sleek, empty. No carved initials in the wood, no stickers peeling off the corners. There were no traces of the boy who had once sprawled across this floor building castles out of blocks. No echo of his laughter or his whispered stories at bedtime. And yet, he reached the window and looked out at the street below. The rain had returned, gentle this time, streaking the glass in thin lines. The porch light flickered on at exactly 8 p.m., just like it always had. Its glow cast a familiar warmth onto the driveway, the same light he remembered seeing in dreams or maybe memories from wherever he had been. Noah touched the window pane, his breath fogging the glass. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm home." The words didn't feel entirely real, not yet. Home wasn't just walls or furniture or even faces. It was a feeling, one that had been dulled by years of silence and strange voices telling him he didn't belong to anyone. But here, in this room, something stirred. Not the same. Never the same. But something. Hannah stood in the hallway, watching him, her arms wrapped around herself as if unsure whether to enter. She didn't speak, didn't want to break whatever fragile thing was holding him in that moment. When Noah turned to look at her, his expression was soft, unreadable, but his eyes held a spark of something she hadn't seen in years. "It's different," he said. She nodded. "I know. But it's okay," he added. "Different can still be real." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between his knees. Rain tapped against the roof. The house creaked faintly, settling in around them like it too was trying to remember how to feel full again. Noah glanced at the shelf, at Mr. Thumper watching from his perch. "I think I'll keep him there," he said. "I don't need him to sleep anymore." Hannah smiled, a tear sliding down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She stepped into the room, sat beside him, close but not too close. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was peaceful. And sometimes that was enough.